the cradle of civilization, where the Tigris and Euphrates once nourished the world's first great cities, ancient scribes pressed wedge-shaped symbols into wet clay, recording stories that would sleep beneath the sand for 4,000 years. Among these weathered tablets lies a mystery that scholars have long overlooked. References to a celestial body so terrifying, so inherently dangerous, that even the Anunnaki, those powerful beings the Sumerians credited with descending from the heavens, refused to set foot upon its surface. What could frighten entities that ancient texts describe as immortal? What secrets lie encoded in cuneiform script about a forbidden world in our solar system? Tonight, we journey through millennia of forgotten knowledge to uncover the one planet even the gods feared to touch. In the Fertile Crescent, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers wind their ancient paths through what is now southern Iraq, there arose sometime around 4,500 years before the Common Era, a civilization unlike anything the world had seen before, a people we call the Sumerians, who built the first true cities humanity would ever know. And when we speak of cities, we must understand that these were not mere settlements or overgrown villages, but genuine urban centers with populations numbering in the tens of thousands, with specialized craftsmen and priests and administrators, with monumental architecture rising from the flat alluvial plains like mountains made by human hands. And the names of these cities still carry a kind of music across the millennia. With its great ziggurat dedicated to the moon god Nana. Uruk, where the legendary Gilgamesh once walked, and where writing itself may have first emerged from the need to track grain and cattle and the countless transactions of a complex economy. Eridu, which the Sumerians themselves considered the oldest of all cities, and the first place where kingship descended from heaven to earth. And Nippur, the sacred city, where Enlil, the lord of wind and breath, held court over the divine assembly. And what strikes scholars even today is how suddenly and completely this civilization seems to have appeared. For while we can trace gradual developments in the archaeological record, there comes a point where villages become cities, and simple tokens become complex writing, and basic agriculture becomes sophisticated irrigation systems spanning miles of carefully engineered canals. And the Sumerians themselves had an explanation for this remarkable flourishing. An explanation they recorded on thousands of clay tablets that survived the collapse of their civilization and the rise and fall of empires that followed, buried under sand and rubble until curious archaeologists began digging in the 19th century and uncovered libraries that had been silent for 4,000 years. And what these tablets tell us is that the Sumerians did not believe they had developed civilization on their own. They believed they had teachers, beings they called the Anunnaki, a name that scholars generally translate as the princely offspring of An, with An being the sky god, the highest deity in the Sumerian pantheon, the personification of the heavens themselves. And these Anunnaki were not distant abstractions or philosophical concepts, but were understood as real beings, with physical forms and specific personalities and documented interactions with human beings. They formed a complex hierarchy with An at the top, though he was somewhat remote and rarely involved in earthly affairs. And beneath him, Enlil, who commanded the other gods and determined the fates of nations. And Enki, sometimes called Ea, the lord of fresh water and wisdom and craft, who was said to have a particular fondness for humanity. and who, according to the myths, often intervened on behalf of human beings against the harsher judgments of Enlil. And there were many others. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, who would descend to the underworld and return. Utu, the sun god, who crossed the sky each day, bringing light and justice. Nana, the moon god, whose waxing and waning marked the passage of months. And below the great Anunnaki were lesser divine beings called the Igigi, who served the greater gods, and who, according to some texts, once labored in the fields and canals before rebelling against their work and precipitating the creation of humanity to take over their labor. And the Sumerians recorded elaborate stories about these beings, stories of their descent from heaven to earth, stories of how they established the first cities and taught humanity the arts of civilization, stories of how they granted to humans what were called the me, a term that is difficult to translate precisely, but which seems to mean something like the fundamental patterns or divine gifts that make civilization possible, including kingship and priesthood, and the scribal arts, and the knowledge of construction and irrigation and metallurgy and astronomy and law and temple rites, and all the countless practices that distinguish civilized life from the simplicity of wandering and hunting. And in text after text, the message remains consistent that these beings traveled from elsewhere and descended to Earth and shared with humanity the tools of civilization, including writing and law and agriculture and astronomy. And modern scholars have debated for generations how to interpret these remarkable narratives, with the mainstream academic view holding that these are mythological expressions of how the Sumerians understood their world and their place in it, metaphorical and theological statements dressed in the language of divine intervention, representing perhaps the deification of cultural innovations or the projection of social hierarchies onto the cosmic order. And this view has much to recommend it. For we know that ancient peoples throughout the world developed similar mythologies about gods descending from heaven and teaching humanity. And we know that metaphor and symbolism are deeply embedded in religious expression across all cultures, and scholars rightly caution against reading ancient texts too literally through modern eyes that expect the kind of precise factual reporting we might find in contemporary journalism. Yet other researchers have proposed alternative interpretations. Most famously, Zecharia Sitchin, who beginning in the 1970s published a series of books arguing that the Sumerian texts should be read as actual historical records of extraterrestrial beings who visited Earth in the distant past, with Sitchin claiming that his own translations of cuneiform revealed details about a planet called Nibiru with an enormously long orbit that periodically brings it close to Earth. And while Sitchin's work has been extensively criticized by mainstream Assyriologists who dispute his translations and methodology, his ideas have captured the imagination of millions and spawned an entire genre of alternative history that continues to find new adherents today. And whatever one thinks of these alternative interpretations, they have had the effect of bringing wider attention to Sumerian literature and encouraging people to examine these ancient texts for themselves. And perhaps this is the most important point, that whether one sees these texts as mythology or metaphor or memory, the stories themselves remain, pressed into clay, waiting to be read by each new generation, waiting to offer whatever wisdom or wonder or warning they contain to anyone willing to listen to voices that have been whispering from the ancient past for 40 centuries. And the Sumerians gave us many gifts that persist into our modern world, including the wheel and the written word, and the 60-minute hour and the 360-degree circle. But perhaps their most remarkable legacy was their understanding of the heavens. For a people without telescopes and without spacecraft and without even basic magnifying lenses, their knowledge of our solar system was surprisingly complete, and it is within their astronomical texts that we find the first hints of the mystery that brings us here tonight. Long before the invention of the telescope, before the mathematical frameworks of Greek astronomy, before the great observatories of the medieval Islamic world, the Sumerians stood atop their great ziggurats and watched the heavens with a patience and precision that still astonishes modern scholars. These massive stepped temples, rising from the flat Mesopotamian plains like artificial mountains, served purposes beyond the purely religious. They were platforms for observation, now places where priest astronomers could escape the dust and haze of the lowlands and gain an unobstructed view of the night sky. Night after night, generation after generation, these observers tracked the movements of celestial bodies across the darkness, recording their findings on clay tablets that would survive for millennia. The resulting body of astronomical knowledge, compiled in texts like the Mul-Apin, represents one of humanity's first systematic attempts to understand the cosmos. The Mul-Apin itself, named for its opening words meaning the plough star, contains detailed catalogues of stars and constellations, precise observations of planetary movements, and calculations of lunar cycles that demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. These ancient astronomers could predict eclipses, track the wandering paths of the planets against the fixed stars, and divide the heavens into the 12 sections that would eventually become our zodiac. With nothing but their eyes and their patience, the Sumerians mapped the heavens with an accuracy that would not be matched in Europe for 3,000 years. The question that haunts modern researchers is not whether the Sumerians were skilled observers, for the evidence of their skill is overwhelming, but rather how they obtained certain pieces of knowledge that seemed to exceed what naked eye observation alone could provide. Among the celestial bodies, the Sumerians tracked with particular attention were those they called the Wanderers, the planets that moved against the background of fixed stars. They clearly identified 5 of these wandering bodies, those we now call Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the planets visible without optical aid. Each was given a name, a divine association, and a detailed set of characteristics recorded across numerous texts. But here is where the mystery deepens. Certain Sumerian texts speak not of 5 wandering bodies, but of more. Some references seem to point towards celestial objects that the Sumerians should not have been able to see, planets or bodies beyond the reach of unaided human vision. The number 12 appears repeatedly in Sumerian cosmological texts, sometimes referring to the 12 months of the year, sometimes to the 12 houses of the zodiac, but sometimes apparently to 12 celestial bodies in our solar system. If we count the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets, we reach only 7. What were the other 5 bodies the Sumerians seem to reference? Were these purely mythological constructs, symbolic numbers without astronomical meaning? Or did the Sumerians somehow possess knowledge of outer planets that would not be officially discovered until the invention of the telescope thousands of years later? The implications of this question are profound, and the debate continues among scholars who interpret these ancient texts in very different ways. Among the most fascinating and controversial pieces of evidence in this debate is a small cylinder seal currently housed in the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin, catalogued as A243. This tiny artifact, carved more than 4,000 years ago, depicts a scene that alternative researchers have interpreted as a representation of our solar system. In the upper left portion of the seal, there appears a star surrounded by smaller circular bodies, an image that some have claimed shows the Sun orbited by 11 planets. If this interpretation is correct, it would suggest that the Sumerians knew not only about the outer planets invisible to the naked eye, but potentially about additional bodies in our solar system that modern astronomy has yet to confirm. Mainstream archaeologists, however, offer a more cautious reading. They point out that the central figure in the disputed image may not be the Sun at all, but simply a star, one of many stellar symbols common in Mesopotamian art. The surrounding circles in this view are not planets but other stars, or perhaps a decorative motif with no specific astronomical meaning. The seal itself depicts a scene of worship or offering, and the celestial imagery may be purely symbolic, indicating divine or heavenly context without mapping specific astronomical knowledge. The truth is that we cannot know with certainty what the ancient carver intended to represent. The seal is small, the details are subject to interpretation, and we are separated from its creator by an unbridgeable gulf of time and cultural context. Yet, whether this small cylinder depicts our solar system or something else entirely, it reminds us that the Sumerians were looking up, always looking up, and recording what they saw or believed they saw. The debate over VA 243 is just one example of the larger challenge in interpreting Sumerian astronomical texts and imagery. The challenge of separating observation from mythology, scientific knowledge from religious symbolism. What we can say with greater confidence is that the Sumerians assigned distinct personalities and characteristics to each of the planets they observed. These were not merely points of light moving through the darkness, but living presences, divine beings with specific natures, temperaments, and domains of influence. The planet we call Venus was associated with Inanna, later known as Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. This brilliant morning and evening star, the brightest object in the night sky after the moon, carried the dual nature of its divine patron, beautiful and alluring, yet also fierce and dangerous. The Sumerians tracked its complex movements with particular care, noting its appearances and disappearances, its phases as morning star and evening star, and the omens these movements portended. Mars, the Red Wanderer, was linked to Nergal, god of war, death, and pestilence. Its blood-colored light made this association natural enough, but the Sumerians went further, documenting the planet's characteristics in ways that suggest more than symbolic projection. They noted its variable brightness, its occasional close approaches to Earth, and the unsettling quality of its presence in certain positions of the sky. Jupiter, the Great Wanderer, was associated with Marduk, who would become the supreme deity of Babylon. This connection between the largest planet and the king of the gods appears across multiple Mesopotamian cultures, suggesting a recognition of Jupiter's prominence that goes beyond mere mythology. Saturn, distant and slow-moving, was linked to Ninurta, or sometimes to other deities associated with agriculture and boundaries. Its stately pace through the zodiac, taking nearly 30 years to complete one circuit, gave it associations with time, patience, and cosmic order. Mercury, quick and elusive, rarely straying far from the sun's glare, was connected to Nabu, god of writing and wisdom, perhaps because of its apparent cleverness in appearing and disappearing from view. Each of these planetary personalities was not arbitrary, but reflected genuine observed characteristics: the color of Mars, the brightness of Venus, the speed of Mercury, the steady progress of Saturn. The Sumerians were not merely projecting mythology onto random points of light. They were building a coherent system that connected observation with meaning, astronomy with theology. This system served practical purposes as well, for the positions and movements of planets were read as omens, divine messages encoded in the celestial dance. But beyond these 5 wandering bodies and their divine associations, Sumerian cosmological texts describe a cosmic geography that extended far beyond what the eye could see. The universe, in Sumerian understanding, was structured in layers, with multiple heavens above and multiple levels below. The visible sky was only the nearest of these heavens, the surface of a much deeper cosmic architecture. Beyond the known heavens lay regions that the texts describe in very different terms. If the inner cosmos was divine, the outer cosmos was something else, a realm of primordial forces, of chaos barely contained, of powers that existed before the gods themselves. The Sumerian word Abzu, sometimes translated as the deep, referred not merely to groundwater or the freshwater ocean beneath the earth, but to something more fundamental, a primordial realm of potentiality and danger. Similarly, the outer heavens contained regions that even the Anunnaki approached with caution, boundaries that marked the edge of the ordered cosmos and the beginning of something far older and far less hospitable. It is at these cosmic edges that we find the most tantalizing references in the cuneiform texts. Among the tablets that have survived the millennia are passages that speak of celestial bodies beyond the ordinary planets, bodies that carry warnings rather than simply omens. These references are fragmentary, often damaged, always subject to translation debates, but their general tenor is consistent enough to be remarkable. At the edges of their cosmic map, the Sumerians marked territories that carried warnings, not simply unknown, but forbidden. The language shifts when these outer regions are discussed, from the reverent descriptions of the planetary gods to something more cautious, more fearful. These were not merely distant places, but dangerous ones, and the danger was not passive, but active. Something about these outer reaches threatened those who would approach too closely, even if those travelers were beings of divine power. And among these forbidden places, one stands apart in the tablets, mentioned with a particular kind of silence. We have journeyed now from the dusty cities of Mesopotamia to the star-scattered reaches of Sumerian cosmology. We have met the Anunnaki, those beings of heaven, and seen how they moved between worlds with apparent ease. We have watched Sumerian priest astronomers track the planets across the night sky, assigning each a name and nature, building a cosmic map that joined observation with divinity. But now we must turn to the heart of our mystery, a passage in these ancient texts that speaks of a world the Anunnaki themselves would not touch, a place so dangerous, so inherently hostile, that even beings who traversed the cosmos chose to avoid it entirely. What could create such fear in the fearless? What world bore such a warning that it echoed across thousands of years of careful silence? And now we arrive at the heart of our journey tonight, the mystery that has drawn us through millennia of sand and starlight, through the patient work of archaeologists and the careful hands of translators, to this moment where we must finally ask what the ancient tablets reveal about the one world the Anunnaki would not approach. The textual evidence comes to us from multiple sources, scattered across different collections in museums from London to Berlin to Baghdad. Tablets that were excavated from the ruins of Nineveh, from the temple libraries of Nippur, from the ancient mounds that once were Ur. These are not singular references, not the imaginings of one scribe on one afternoon 4,000 years ago, but rather a consistent thread woven through multiple documents, multiple time periods, multiple scribal traditions. The cuneiform signs themselves tell a story beyond their literal meaning. When Sumerian scribes wished to convey danger, they had many terms at their disposal, words for battle and words for flood, words for the anger of gods, and words for the chaos of uncontrolled nature. Yet when they wrote of this particular celestial body, they chose their vocabulary with unusual precision. The determinative signs that precede the planetary name carry weight, carrying connotations we might translate as forbidden or untouchable or belonging to death. These are not the dramatic flourishes of epic poetry, not the heightened language of mythological combat, but something more measured, more instructional, as though the scribes were recording warnings passed down through generations of careful observation. This place shall not be approached. These words, or their closest equivalent, appear in multiple tablets, sometimes in astronomical contexts, sometimes in religious hymns, sometimes in what appear to be navigational or instructional texts, whose full purpose we do not entirely understand. The consistency is remarkable. Across centuries of Sumerian and later Babylonian writing, the same concept appears. A one world among the celestial family stands apart, marked not with the reverence given to Shamash the sun or the love poetry written for Ishtar as Venus, but with a different quality entirely, a quality of boundary, of limit, of this far and no further. Translation remains challenging, as it always does with texts so ancient. Different scholars reading the same cuneiform signs may offer different English words, different shades of meaning. What one translator renders as dangerous, another might read as forbidden, and a third as belonging to the underworld. Yet beneath these variations, the core meaning persists. This was a world set apart, a world that even the Anunnaki, those powerful beings who moved between heaven and earth with apparent ease, would not or could not visit. The question that naturally follows this textual evidence is perhaps the most compelling of all. Which world? When we read these ancient warnings, which celestial body did the Sumerians have in mind? The process of identification requires us to work carefully through the available clues, matching ancient descriptions against our modern understanding of the solar system. The Sumerians associated each planet with particular deities, particular qualities, particular positions in the cosmic order. They knew the wandering stars that we call planets, distinguishing them from the fixed stars by their movement across the night sky. They tracked these wanderers with remarkable precision, noting their appearances and disappearances, their positions relative to the constellations, their cycles of visibility and invisibility. Each planet bore a name, a character, a set of associations that remained relatively consistent across centuries of astronomical observation. When we examine the texts that speak of the forbidden world, several identifying characteristics emerge. The passages describe a world of enormous size, a world of tremendous atmospheric hostility, a world associated with crushing weight and perpetual storm. The symbolic language speaks of a world that devours, that consumes, that does not permit departure for anything that enters its domain. Some texts associate this world with a position in the outer reaches of the solar system, beyond the familiar territories of the inner planets. Others speak of its appearance, describing bands or layers, describing a world that seems to churn with constant motion even when observed from vast distances. Various candidates have been proposed over the years of scholarly and alternative research. Some have suggested Saturn with its prominent rings and its association with time and limitation. Others have proposed one of the ice giants of the outer system, worlds we now call Uranus and Neptune. A minority have even suggested this forbidden world might be a body beyond our current confirmed planets, perhaps the hypothetical planet that some astronomers believe lurks in the outer darkness of our solar system. Yet when we weigh all the available evidence, when we consider the full range of textual descriptions alongside what we now know about planetary conditions, one world emerges as the most consistent match across multiple identifying criteria. The characteristics described in the ancient tablets align most closely with the planet we call Jupiter, but even more precisely with its nearest neighbor in the outer solar system, the ringed giant we know as Saturn. However, the descriptions of crushing atmospheric pressure, of a world with no solid surface to land upon, of perpetual storms of unimaginable violence, of an environment so hostile that nothing entering it could hope to survive or return. These descriptions point most consistently toward the largest planet in our solar system. When the Sumerians wrote of a world that consumed all who approached it, when they described a realm of endless storm and crushing weight, when they marked one planet alone as forbidden even to the Anunnaki, the evidence suggests they were speaking of Jupiter. The nature of the threat described in these ancient texts becomes more remarkable when we consider what the Sumerians could and could not have known through direct observation. To the naked eye, Jupiter appears as a bright wandering star, the fourth brightest object in the night sky after the Sun, Moon, and Venus. It moves slowly against the background stars, taking nearly 12 Earth years to complete one circuit of the zodiac. The Sumerians tracked this motion carefully, noting Jupiter's associations with their chief god Marduk in later Babylonian tradition. But what they wrote about this world goes far beyond its visible appearance. The texts speak of atmospheric hostility, of a realm where the sky itself becomes the enemy. They describe a world of tremendous pressure, using terms that suggest weight bearing down from all directions. An environment that would crush anything attempting to pass through it. They speak of storms that never end, of churning chaos that has persisted since the beginning of time and will persist until its end. They describe a world that offers no surface, no landing place, no solid ground upon which a traveler might rest. Everything that enters this world, according to these descriptions, is consumed, drawn downward into depths from which there is no return. The concept that emerges from these texts is not simply of a dangerous place, but of a fundamentally different kind of world, a place that does not merely threaten visitors, but actively rejects the very concept of visitation. Other planets in Sumerian cosmology carried their own dangers and associations, but none bore this particular quality of absolute prohibition. Mars was associated with war and violence, but the Anunnaki were described as traveling there. Venus carried associations with both love and death in its dual aspects as morning and evening star, but it too was accessible to divine visitation. Only this one world, this churning giant at the threshold between the inner and outer solar system, carried the designation of forbidden. When we turn from these ancient texts to what modern science has revealed about Jupiter, the correlation becomes quietly extraordinary. Jupiter is indeed a world without a surface. Beneath its turbulent cloud bands lies not rock or ice, but ever-thickening atmosphere that gradually transitions into liquid and eventually into exotic states of matter under pressures we can barely comprehend. The famous Great Red Spot that telescopes have observed for centuries is a storm larger than Earth that has been raging for at least 400 years and possibly much longer. But this is merely the most visible of countless storms that churn across the Jovian atmosphere. The entire planet is a realm of perpetual meteorological violence. Winds on Jupiter reach speeds of hundreds of kilometers per hour. Lightning bolts flash with energies thousands of times more powerful than anything seen on Earth. And beneath the visible cloud tops, conditions become rapidly more extreme. The atmospheric pressure increases steadily as you descend. At the point where the clouds give way to clear hydrogen gas, the pressure is already several times that of Earth's surface. Descend further, and the pressure continues to mount. At some depth below the clouds, the pressure becomes so extreme that hydrogen itself behaves in ways we cannot replicate in any laboratory on Earth, becoming a metallic liquid that conducts electricity and generates Jupiter's immense magnetic field. No human spacecraft has ever survived long in this environment. The Galileo probe, deliberately sent into Jupiter's atmosphere in 1995, transmitted data for approximately 57 minutes before the increasing pressure and temperature destroyed it. It reached a depth of about 150 kilometers below the cloud tops before falling silent, crushed, and melted, and ultimately vaporized as it continued its descent into the abyss. And 150 kilometers is barely scratching the surface of a world whose radius is nearly 70,000 kilometers. The probe glimpsed only the outermost skin of this hostile realm before being consumed, just as the ancient texts described by a world that devours everything that enters it. It is perhaps coincidence. Perhaps the Sumerians, observing Jupiter's slow, bright passage through their skies, simply imagined a hostile world and assigned it characteristics that happened by chance to match the reality we have only recently discovered. Human imagination has always populated the unknown with dangers. And what could be more unknown to an ancient observer than a wandering light that moved against the fixed stars? Perhaps the association with divine kingship led naturally to descriptions of overwhelming power, and overwhelming power expressed itself through images of storm and crushing weight and inescapable consumption. This would be the sensible scholarly position, the interpretation that requires no extraordinary claims about ancient knowledge. And yet, one cannot help but notice how precisely these imagined dangers correspond to actual conditions. The Sumerians did not describe Jupiter as a world of fire, though they associated other celestial bodies with flame. They did not describe it as a frozen wasteland, though they knew of cold and ice. They described it specifically as a world of crushing pressure, perpetual storm, and atmospheric hostility that would destroy any attempt at visitation. They described it as a world with no surface, a world of endless descent, a world where the very attempt to land would result in destruction. 4,000 years before the Galileo probe confirmed these conditions through direct measurement, the clay tablets of Mesopotamia recorded them in careful cuneiform. Perhaps they imagined well. Perhaps they simply happened to guess correctly about conditions no naked eye could possibly observe. Or perhaps the traditions they inherited, the warnings they faithfully recorded, the knowledge they attributed to the Anunnaki themselves, preserved some genuine understanding of what this world truly was. The deeper question that emerges from this mystery may be more profound than any identification of which planet the texts describe. Why would the Anunnaki, as the Sumerians understood them, fear anything at all? Throughout the corpus of Sumerian literature, these beings appear as figures of tremendous power. They descend from heaven to earth. They shape human destiny. They grant the gifts of civilization and the decrees of divine order. They live for spans of time that might as well be eternity from a human perspective. They possess technologies or abilities that allowed them to traverse the cosmic distances. And yet, before this one world, they stopped. The texts do not describe the Anunnaki attempting to visit Jupiter and failing. They do not tell stories of disastrous expeditions or heroic struggles against the hostile environment. Instead, the tablets simply note that this world was not to be approached. Even these beings, these powerful visitors from beyond, recognized a limit. This suggests something important about how the Sumerians conceptualized their gods, something that distinguishes their theology from later conceptions of omnipotent deity. The Anunnaki were powerful beyond human understanding, but they were not infinite. They operated within a cosmos that had rules, limits, boundaries that even divine beings respected. The existence of a forbidden world was not a flaw in the cosmic order, but part of it, a reminder that the universe contains regions hostile to life in any form, realms where even the greatest powers must acknowledge that some doors are better left unopened. Perhaps this is the true message of the Forbidden Planet, less about any specific world in our solar system than about the humility appropriate to all beings, mortal and divine alike, when facing the vast indifference of the cosmos. The Anunnaki were not afraid in the way humans fear predators or enemies. They simply recognized, with the wisdom of beings who had seen many worlds, that some places exist where the very conditions of existence do not apply. Some worlds are not hostile out of malice, but simply out of nature. Some doors in the universe are closed not by locks, but by the fundamental physics of reality itself. Even the gods knew better than to challenge those boundaries. If the Sumerians alone spoke of a forbidden world, we might dismiss it as unique mythology, the peculiar belief of one ancient culture that simply happened to assign hostile characteristics to a bright wandering star. But as we widen our gaze across the ancient world, we find echoes of this same theme in cultures that should have had no contact with Mesopotamia, in texts separated by oceans and millennia. In temples across the globe, in astronomical traditions developed independently on separate continents, the same warning appears in different forms. There are places in the cosmos that life cannot go, worlds that reject all visitors, planets that even the gods avoid. This consistency across cultures raises questions that simple coincidence struggles to answer. Did separate civilizations simply arrive at similar conclusions through independent imagination, the human mind naturally populating the unknown with danger? Did some form of cultural transmission carry these ideas along ancient trade routes we have not fully mapped? Or does this consistency point towards something else, some shared experience or inherited memory or direct observation that we do not yet understand? These questions carry us forward into the next portion of our journey, where we will trace these echoes across time and space, following the thread of the forbidden world through cultures far removed from the clay tablets of ancient Sumer. When the great cities of Sumer eventually faded and their people scattered like seeds upon the wind, their knowledge did not vanish with them, but instead flowed into new vessels, carried forward by the civilization that rose to dominance in the fertile lands between the rivers. The Babylonians, who inherited not merely territory, but an entire cosmos of understanding. And it is here in the libraries of Babylon that we find the Sumerian warnings preserved and transformed, woven into new mythologies, yet carrying the same essential truths about the structure of the heavens and the dangers that lurked within them. The great Babylonian creation epic, known as the Enuma Elish, speaks of cosmic battles and the ordering of the universe, of Marduk the champion who defeated the primordial chaos and established the stations of the stars. And within this grand narrative, the planets take their places as divine actors in an eternal drama, each assigned a role, a nature, a territory of influence. And among these celestial powers, the same distinctions appear that we found in the older Sumerian texts, the same sense that some regions of the cosmos welcomed approach, while others carried inherent danger. That the heavens were not uniform in their hospitality, but contained zones where even the gods moved with caution or refused to venture at all. Babylonian astronomers refined and systematized what they had inherited, creating detailed ephemerides that tracked planetary movements with remarkable precision, developing mathematical techniques that would not be surpassed for over 1,000 years. And throughout their meticulous observations and calculations, the same planetary personalities persisted, the same associations between certain worlds and concepts of hostility, consumption, and forbidden passage that the Sumerians had recorded centuries before, suggesting that this was not merely inherited mythology, but represented something the Babylonians themselves continued to recognize in their study of the heavens. Far to the southwest, in the land of the Nile, where a parallel civilization had risen in the shadows of great pyramids, the Egyptians developed their own elaborate cosmology, a vision of the universe that placed the sun god Ra at its center and mapped the journey of souls through regions of light and darkness. And while their system differed in many particulars from the Mesopotamian model, certain underlying themes resonate with surprising familiarity when we listen for them. The Egyptian concept of Isfet, the principle of chaos and dissolution that eternally opposed the ordered cosmos of Ma'at, found expression in celestial geography, in the idea that beyond the known and ordered heavens lay regions of primordial hostility where the forces of destruction dwelt, and the god Set, that complicated figure who embodied both necessary violence and dangerous chaos, held associations with the outer darkness, with those regions of the sky that spelled danger for any who entered them unprepared. The Duat itself, that mysterious realm through which the dead journeyed, and through which Ra passed during the hours of night, contained regions of such danger that even divine beings required special protections to traverse them. The places where the unprepared would be destroyed, not by malicious intent, but by the very nature of the environment itself. And scholars have long noted that these dangerous celestial regions seem to correspond, in some Egyptian texts, to specific locations in the heavens, to planetary bodies whose influence was deemed inherently hostile. Trade routes connected Egypt and Mesopotamia from the earliest times, carrying not only goods, but ideas across the deserts and along the coasts. And we cannot say with certainty whether the Egyptians developed their concepts of cosmic danger independently or absorbed them through cultural exchange with their Eastern neighbors. But the parallel remains striking. The shared intuition that the cosmos contained not only wonders, but warnings. Not only destinations, but boundaries that even the divine hesitated to cross. The Greeks, who would eventually inherit and transform the astronomical knowledge of both civilizations, spoke of similar themes in their own mythological vocabulary. Of Typhon, the terrible monster imprisoned beneath the earth, whose influence reached into the heavens. Of the Titans, those elder gods who had been cast into Tartarus for their rebellion against the Olympian order. And these stories of cosmic imprisonment and dangerous powers contained within them seeds of the same understanding we have traced from ancient Sumer. When Greek philosophers and astronomers began to systematize their knowledge of the heavens, they drew heavily upon Babylonian sources, adopting planetary names and associations that carried within them the accumulated observations of millennia, and the planet that the Babylonians had associated with their war god. Nergal became connected in Greek thought with Ares, the bringer of conflict, and later in Roman usage with Mars, each culture translating the celestial vocabulary while preserving something of its essential meaning. Yet it was not merely the warlike planets that carried dangerous associations in classical thought, for Greek and Roman cosmologists spoke of regions beyond the sphere of Saturn, the outermost known planet, where the fixed stars dwelt in their eternal patterns, and beyond which lay realms of such mystery and potential hostility that philosophers debated whether they could be approached at all, even in thought. The Stoic cosmologists, who developed some of antiquity's most sophisticated models of the universe, spoke of the ekperosis, the periodic conflagration that consumed and renewed all things, and associated certain celestial regions with this destructive potential, with forces that could unmake as readily as the ordered cosmos could create. When we turn our gaze eastward to the ancient civilizations of India, we discover cosmological systems of breathtaking complexity and age, systems that in many ways parallel the Mesopotamian model while developing in apparent independence across the barrier of mountain ranges and vast distances. Hindu cosmology speaks of multiple lokas or realms of existence, arranged in hierarchies of increasing subtlety and power. And among these realms, certain are designated as places of danger, worlds where the conditions are so extreme that even divine beings cannot easily endure them, where the accumulated karma of eons has created environments hostile to all but the most powerful or the most purified. The concept of planetary influence in Hindu astrology, which achieved remarkable sophistication in ancient times, includes detailed descriptions of the nature of each celestial body. And among these descriptions, we find the same patterns of hospitality and hostility, of beneficial and malefic influences, of worlds that support life and worlds that threaten it, suggesting either very ancient transmission of ideas across the vast distances separating India from Mesopotamia, or independent observation leading to similar conclusions. The Chinese astronomical tradition, developing largely in isolation from both Western and Indian influences, nonetheless produced its own detailed mapping of celestial dangers and forbidden regions, its own sophisticated astrology that classified planetary influences as beneficial or harmful, its own sense that the cosmos contained not only harmonious patterns, but discordant zones where the fundamental forces operated in ways dangerous to life and order. Chinese astronomers tracked the movements of the planets with precision rivaling that of their Babylonian contemporaries, assigned them personalities and influences based on centuries of observation. And among their classifications, we find the same distinction between worlds that could be approached and worlds that could not, between celestial bodies that supported the mandate of heaven and those that threatened it. Across the Pacific, in the civilizations of Mesoamerica that rose and flourished with no contact with the Old World until the catastrophic meeting of cultures in the 16th century, we discover yet another independent tradition of astronomical observation and cosmological thought, another mapping of the heavens that distinguished between beneficial and dangerous celestial influences. The Maya, whose astronomical achievements have increasingly astonished modern researchers, tracked the movements of Venus with particular intensity, noting its periods of visibility and invisibility, and associated this brilliant planet with forces both creative and destructive, with gods whose influence could bring either abundance or catastrophe depending on the celestial configurations. Now, other planets received their own associations in Mesoamerican thought, their own classifications as helpful or harmful, their own roles in the cosmic drama that determined the fate of kingdoms and the appropriate times for human action. And while the specific identifications differ from those of the Old World, the underlying pattern of discriminating between approachable and forbidden celestial bodies suggests something universal in human response to the heavens. Whether these parallel traditions represent the diffusion of ancient knowledge across barriers we once thought impermeable, or whether they represent the independent conclusions of observers, using only their eyes and their reason to study the same celestial phenomena, we cannot definitively say, and perhaps the answer lies somewhere between these possibilities. We're in the combination of shared ancient heritage and universal human intuition about the nature of cosmic space. What seems clear across all these cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, and mountains and language, is the persistent sense that the cosmos is not uniformly hospitable, that among the wandering stars certain carry warnings, that there exist in the heavens places where life cannot go and powers that reject all approach. And this consensus of ancient wisdom speaks to something deeper than mere coincidence, something that perhaps our ancestors understood more clearly than we have allowed ourselves to remember. In our modern age, we have inherited these ancient associations, even as we have forgotten their origins. For the science fiction stories that populate our entertainment speak frequently of forbidden planets, of worlds so hostile that no expedition can survive them, of cosmic environments that defeat all technology and destroy all who dare to approach. And these narrative patterns did not emerge from nothing, but rather from the deep well of human imagination that has always contained this intuition of celestial danger. when our spacecraft venture into the outer solar system and send back images of worlds racked by radiation and pressure and storms beyond terrestrial comprehension, we experience a recognition that is also a remembering, a scientific confirmation of what storytellers and priests and astronomers have said for as long as we have looked up at the night sky and wondered what dwelt among those distant lights. The warnings encoded in cuneiform and hieroglyph and classical text and Sanskrit scripture and Chinese astronomical records and Mayan codex speak across the ages to this moment of technological capability, when we finally possess the means to test what our ancestors could only intuit. And what we discover in those hostile environments suggests that perhaps the ancient warnings were wiser than we knew. Perhaps, somewhere in the collective memory of our species, preserved in mythology and ritual and the names we give to distant worlds, there survives genuine knowledge from a time we have forgotten. Knowledge about the nature of certain planets and the impossibility of approaching them. Knowledge that may have originated we know not where or when, but has persisted through all the changes of culture and language and belief because it encoded something true. Or perhaps this represents simply the universal response of intelligent life to the recognition of hostile environments, the extrapolation from earthly dangers to celestial ones, the imagination of primitive peoples who assumed the cosmos must contain terrors commensurate with its wonders, and the remarkable accuracy of some ancient descriptions is merely coincidence, the lucky guess of observers who could not possibly have known what they seemed to describe. We have traveled far tonight through the accumulated wisdom of human civilization, from the reed houses of ancient Ur to the storm-racked clouds of a distant world. Through millennia of human wondering and watching and writing upon clay and papyrus and parchment and paper. The tablets that began our journey still lie in museums around the world, still holding their secrets in wedge-shaped impressions, still waiting to be more fully understood by scholars who bring new tools and new perspectives to their ancient mysteries. As we turn now toward conclusion, we carry with us more questions than answers, more wonder than certainty, and perhaps that is as it should be, for the cosmos reveals itself slowly to those who approach with patience, and the warnings of our ancestors deserve neither dismissal nor uncritical acceptance, but rather the careful attention of minds willing to consider possibilities that lie beyond the boundaries of comfortable knowledge. And so, we arrive at the place where every journey must eventually come to rest, not at a destination of certainty, but at a quiet clearing where we can sit with all that we have gathered and simply breathe. We have traveled together through the dusty streets of ancient Ur, through the reed marshes where the first cities rose beside slow-moving rivers, through temple archives where priests recorded the movements of stars and the stories of beings who descended from the heavens. We have examined clay tablets that have waited 4,000 years to be read again, tablets that speak of worlds beyond our own, and of one world in particular that even the Anunnaki would not approach. And now we must ask ourselves what we truly know and what remains beautifully, perhaps permanently, uncertain. The honest answer is that we cannot prove what the Sumerians knew or how they came to know it. We cannot climb inside the minds of those ancient scribes, cannot see through their eyes as they watched the night sky from the tops of ziggurats, cannot know whether their knowledge came from careful observation, from inherited tradition, from contact with beings beyond our world, or from some combination of sources we cannot imagine. What we can observe is that their descriptions, filtered through millennia and the imperfect art of translation, align in remarkable ways with realities they should not have been able to observe with the naked eye alone. They described a world of crushing weight, of perpetual storm, of an atmosphere that devours anything that enters it. And when our modern spacecraft finally reached that distant world, they found conditions that match those ancient warnings with an accuracy that gives us pause. Perhaps this is coincidence. Perhaps the Sumerians simply imagined a hostile world and happened to guess correctly about its nature. Perhaps there are patterns in the human imagination that lead all cultures to envision similar cosmic dangers. Or perhaps, and this is where we enter the territory of wonder rather than proof, perhaps they knew something that we are only now rediscovering through our instruments and our mathematics and our robot ambassadors to the outer planets. The truth is that we may never know for certain, and there is a strange peace in accepting this. Our modern world often demands answers, demands that every question be resolved, every mystery explained, every ancient text decoded into facts that can be verified and filed away. But some mysteries may not be meant for solving. Some questions may be more valuable as questions than they could ever be as answers. There is beauty in turning these ancient riddles over in our minds like smooth stones worn by an ancient river, appreciating their weight and their coolness and their perfect rounded edges without demanding that they reveal how they came to be shaped just so. The Sumerians understood this kind of knowing that lives alongside not knowing. Their wisdom literature speaks often of humility before the gods, of accepting that mortal understanding has limits, of finding peace within boundaries rather than constantly straining against them. Perhaps their warning about the forbidden world was not only practical but philosophical, now a reminder that even beings of great power must recognize when they have reached the edge of what is possible, when the cosmos itself says no further. And perhaps this is the deepest lesson these ancient tablets offer us, not the location of a specific dangerous planet, but the understanding that wonder and humility are inseparable, that to truly appreciate the vastness of the universe, we must also appreciate how small we are within it, how much we do not and perhaps cannot know. Tonight, if you step outside and look up at the stars, you will see the same lights the Sumerians saw when they stood on the flat roofs of their mud brick homes and gazed upward into the darkness. The same planets are tracking their ancient paths across the sky. The same constellations wheel slowly overhead. The same vast silence stretches between the worlds. 4,000 years is nothing to the stars. 100 human generations have lived and died since those first tablets were pressed. And still Ishtar rises in the morning sky. Still Nergal glows red on the horizon. Still the wandering lights move against the fixed stars in their eternal dance. Perhaps somewhere among those lights is the world the Anunnaki feared to approach, shining softly with reflected sunlight, giving no visible hint of the crushing storms that rage beneath its clouds. Or perhaps the warning was never really about a single planet at all, but about something larger, something that the ancient scribes understood in their bones, even if they could not fully articulate it. Perhaps they were trying to tell us that the cosmos is not entirely welcoming, that among all the wonders of creation, there are places where life simply cannot go, forces that even the most powerful beings must respect. Perhaps they were teaching humility, dressed in the clothing of mythology, wrapping a philosophical truth inside a story about gods and forbidden worlds. We cannot know their intentions any more than we can know their sources. We can only receive what they left for us and carry it forward as best we can, adding our own wondering to the wondering of all the generations that came before. And that, in the end, may be enough. Not certainty, but curiosity. Not answers, but better questions. Not the satisfaction of having solved a mystery, but the deeper satisfaction of having sat with it, having let it work on us, having allowed ourselves to feel small and amazed and peacefully uncertain all at once. The tablets will remain at their museum cases, patient and silent. The stars will continue their ancient courses. And we will go on wondering, as humans have always wondered, about what lies beyond the next hill, beyond the horizon, beyond the thin shell of atmosphere that separates us from the infinite darkness where the Anunnaki once traveled, and where one world still waits, untouched and untouchable, keeping whatever secrets it keeps. May your sleep be deep and restful. May your dreams carry you gently through the ancient night. And may you wake tomorrow with the same spirit of wonder that led those first astronomers to look up and begin the long conversation with the cosmos that continues, unbroken, to this very moment. And so we come to rest at last beneath the same stars that shone over ancient Sumer, the same patient lights that guided those first astronomers as they climbed their ziggurats and pressed their observations into soft clay. And if you have traveled with us this far through the millennia of mystery and wonder, then we offer our quiet gratitude for your company on this journey through time and space. For there is something beautiful about minds meeting across the ages to contemplate the same questions that occupied priests and scribes in temples that have long since crumbled to dust. And now, as the night deepens and the desert wind whispers across the dunes that cover forgotten cities, we can let these thoughts settle like sand after a storm, no longer grasping for answers, but simply allowing the mystery to exist as it has existed for thousands of years. And somewhere in a museum, a clay tablet rests in climate-controlled silence, its wedge-shaped mark still holding the words of someone who lived and wondered and looked up at the night sky, just as we do, and the stars have not changed. Not really, though empires have risen and fallen, and languages have been born and died, and the very course of rivers has shifted across the land. The stars remain, wheeling in their slow, eternal dance. And perhaps tonight, as sleep begins to soften the edges of waking thought, you might carry with you some image from our journey. Perhaps the towering ziggurat of rising from the plain, or the careful hands of a scribe pressing reed into clay, or the vast silence between the worlds where ancient beings were said to travel. And these images can drift now like clouds across a darkening sky, imprisoned but not demanding attention, simply there as companions for the passage into dream. And the wind moves across the desert as it has always moved, carrying sand from places that once knew the footsteps of priests and kings. And the stars turn overhead as they turned when the first watchers gave them names. And somewhere in the solar system, that forbidden world continues its ancient orbit, wrapped in storms that have raged for centuries, keeping whatever secrets it keeps, patient as it has always been. Patient, and we need not solve these mysteries tonight. We need only rest in the knowledge that they exist, that there are still wonders waiting to be understood, that the universe remains vast and strange and full of questions that humble us in the asking. And sleep comes now as it came to those ancient astronomers after long nights of watching, as it comes to all who wonder, a gentle tide that carries us from waking shores to whatever dreams may wait. And the tablets sleep in their museum cases, and the ruins sleep beneath their blankets of sand, and the stars continue their slow turning, and all is quiet now, all is peaceful, and the mysteries can wait. They have waited this long, and they will wait longer still, patient as stone, eternal as the night sky. And now the stars continue their ancient journey as they always have and as they always will, while we rest beneath them, dreaming perhaps of cuneiform and clay, and of distant worlds and ancient warnings, and of all the mysteries that wait patient as stone for someone to wonder.